Due process of the law is the topic today, and we are covering Colorado State Social Studies standard for middle school. Civics 2D, students should be able to explain the role and importance of the Constitution. When students get done with this podcast, they should be able to define the term due process. They should be able to explain the difference between the Fifth and the 14th Amendments, and they should be able to explain how the process applies to the rights of individuals who are accused of breaking the law. Today, I don't have any words appearing on the screen to help complete the notes, so you will just have to listen very clearly. We're going to start with what is the due process of law. The due process of law is the right to be treated fairly by the government. Now, there are two important ways that this meaning is applied. The first is through the procedures or the methods that all parts of the government use must be fair. The methods that all parts of the government use must be fair. So the steps that you go through. The other part is through the content. The content of the laws must be fair and reasonable. You can't have unfair laws. Laws must not place unfair limitations on the right to life, liberty, or property. The Fifth Amendment specifically says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Now, I've got to give you a little background here, and as many of you know, there were slaves when the Bill of Rights, when the Constitution was written. So, this doesn't quite make sense. If no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property, are slaves people? Well, those in the South said that they were property. And there was an important Supreme Court case, the Dred Scott decision, that actually made it okay to call basically slaves property. Really what happened was it said that nobody who was brought into the United States as a slave or their descendants could ever be considered a citizen of certain states. And so that Fifth Amendment is really kind of tricky because it doesn't mention anything about what state governments can or can't do. Now, once slavery was ultimately abolished, there had to be some changes made. And so the 14th Amendment actually includes actions of the state. And it says, nor shall any state deprive any persons of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. So, after the abolition of slavery, with the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment had to go in there and really tell the states that they had to recognize former slaves as citizens. Now, the next part of this lesson is how can the rights of the individual and the rights of society conflict, and how can you balance those rights? There are problems with due process, and they include two government responsibilities. You have to protect the rights of an individual who may have broken the law, and you have to protect everyone else from people who break the law and endanger the lives, liberty, or property of others. It's a balancing act. Protect those who have broken the law and protect everybody else. It is the duty of the government and the courts to balance these responsibilities. Protecting the individual from unfair treatment by government is among the most important protections of our constitutional democracy. This due process applies to local school board meetings, to congressional hearings, and to hearings of the state and federal government. The government has to be fair. Okay, now that we're done, on a separate sheet of paper, explain what due process means, explain the difference between the 5th and the 14th Amendments, and explain how the process applies to the rights of individuals who are accused of breaking the law.